The dust had a way of settling into everything in Dust Creek. It crept through the cracks in the walls, gathered in the corners of rooms, and turned even the brightest fabrics a dull, rusty brown. Evelyn Harper stood on the porch of her weathered homestead, watching the horizon shimmer in the late afternoon heat. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of another dry day tomorrow. She was 26, though the mirror told her she looked older. The desert had that effect on people, carved lines into their faces like water carving canyons through rock. Her calloused hands gripped the porch railing as she squinted into the distance, still searching for a figure that wouldn't come. It had been 3 weeks since Thomas rode away. Fool woman, she muttered to herself, turning back toward the house. The screen door squeaked on its hinges, another thing Thomas had promised to fix before he left, before he'd saddled his horse in the pre-dawn darkness and disappeared into the vast expanse of the Arizona Territory without so much as a farewell. Inside, the house felt emptier than usual. Their few possessions, a rocking chair, a pine table, mismatched dishes, seemed to mock her with their ordinariness. This was what he'd left behind. This, and her, the morning he'd gone. She'd woken to find his side of the bed cold. Through the window, she'd seen him in the barn, moving with purpose. She'd thought nothing of it at first. Ranchers rose early. But something in the way he moved, the careful way he'd packed his saddlebags, had drawn her to the window. She'd watched him lead his horse out, watched him pause at the gate. For a moment, she'd thought he might look back. Instead, he'd mounted up and ridden west, his silhouette growing smaller and smaller until the desert swallowed him whole. Her husband rode away forever. The words echoed in her mind like a prophecy she couldn't shake. The knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Evelyn smoothed her apron and tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear before answering, "Mrs." Adelaide Hutchins stood on the porch, her round face flushed from the walk over. Behind her, the dusty main street of Dust Creek stretched out, with its handful of buildings looking as tired as everything else in this forgotten corner of the world. "Afternoon, Evelyn," Adelaide said, though her eyes were already cataloging the interior of the house, searching for gossip. "Thought I'd check on you, seeing as how Thomas has been away on business for so long." "Business," Evelyn repeated flatly. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but it was better than the truth, better than admitting she'd been abandoned like a broken wagon wheel on the side of the trail. Adelaide's eyes glittered with barely concealed curiosity. "Yes, well, it must be quite important business to keep him away so long. The harvest is coming, after all." Evelyn forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thomas always did have a head for opportunity. I'm managing fine on my own." "Of course you are, dear." Adelaide's tone suggested otherwise. "Though I did notice your fence is starting to lean something terrible, and with the Hendricks bull getting loose last week." She trailed off meaningfully. After Adelaide finally left, trailing promises to check in again soon, Evelyn walked out to inspect the fence. The woman was right. Several posts had worked loose in the hard-packed earth. Without Thomas, without help, keeping the ranch running would be like trying to hold water in her hands. She was so focused on the fence that she didn't hear the horse approaching until its shadow fell across her. Looking up, she found herself staring at Rhett Callahan, her nearest neighbor from the ranch 2 miles north. He sat his horse like he'd been born to it, which he probably had, somewhere in his 30s. Rhett had the weathered look of a man who'd spent his life under the unforgiving sun. His dark hair was a little too long, his jaw shadowed with stubble, but it was his eyes that caught her, gray as a storm cloud, and just as unreadable. "Mrs. Harper," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Mr. Callahan." She straightened, acutely aware of the dirt on her hands and the wisps of hair escaping from her bun. His gaze moved from her to the leaning fence posts, then back again. "Fence giving you trouble?" "Nothing I can't handle." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Something flickered in his eyes' amusement. "Maybe," or understanding. No doubt, but if you need posts from my lumber pile, you're welcome to them. Pride warred with practicality. I couldn't consider it neighborly. He cut her off. Your fence goes down. Your cattle wander onto my land. Then it becomes my problem too. It was a practical argument, one that allowed her to accept help without feeling like charity. She nodded stiffly. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. He studied her for a moment longer, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he saw more than she wanted to show. Then he touched his hat again and rode on, leaving her standing in the dust. That night, Evelyn lay in the too-large bed, listening to the coyotes howl in the distance. The house creaked and settled around her, each sound magnified in the darkness. She'd left a lamp burning in the window, a foolish waste of oil. But she couldn't help herself. Some part of her still believed Thomas might see it and find his way home. But men who rode away into the desert rarely came back. She'd heard enough stories in her years in Dust Creek, men lured by gold strikes, by the promise of adventure, by demons they couldn't name. They left behind wives and children, farms and responsibilities, chasing something that glittered on the horizon. The worst part was not knowing. Was he dead in some canyon? Picked clean by buzzards? Had he found another woman in some distant town? Or was he simply riding still, putting more and more distance between himself and the life they'd built together? She rolled onto her side, pulling the quilts tighter despite the warmth of the night. Tomorrow, she'd have to face the fence again, and the chickens, and the small herd of cattle that needed moving to better pasture. All the endless tasks that kept a ranch running, that had once been shared between two. A sound outside made her sit up. Horse hooves. Her heart leaped before she could stop it. She rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness, but it was only the wind, rattling the loose barn door. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Damn you, Thomas McGraw, she whispered. Damn you for leaving me here alone. The next morning dawned clear and mercilessly bright. Evelyn rose before the sun, as she always had, and set about the day's work. The chickens needed feeding, the horses needed water, and that fence wasn't going to fix itself. She was struggling with a particularly stubborn post when she heard wagon wheels. Looking up, she saw an unexpected sight, a load of fence posts in the back of a wagon, and Rhett Callahan holding the reins. Morning, he said, as if delivering lumber at dawn was perfectly ordinary. Mr. Callahan, I didn't expect— Had some extras, he said, already climbing down. Figured you could use them. She watched, torn between gratitude and embarrassment, as he unloaded the posts. When he started digging out one of the loose ones, she grabbed a shovel. I can manage, she insisted. He looked at her, then at the shovel in her hands, and nodded. I know you can, but the work goes faster with two. And so they worked side by side in the rising heat, speaking only when necessary. Pass the hammer. Hold this steady. By the time the sun was fully up, a good section of fence stood straight and true. Thank you, Evelyn said as he loaded his tools back in the wagon. Rhett paused, looking out toward the horizon. He's not coming back, is he? The question hit her like a physical blow. I don't know what you mean. Thomas saw him ride out 3 weeks back. Had the look of a man who'd made up his mind. He turned to face her. I'm sorry. He's on business, she said automatically, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Rhett nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something. If you need anything more posts, help with the cattle, you let me know. After he left, Evelyn stood looking at the repaired fence. It was sturdy now, ready to withstand the desert winds. If only she could repair the hole in her life as easily. That afternoon, she rode into town for supplies. The general store was quiet, but she could feel eyes on her as she gathered what she needed. Flour, beans, coffee, the basics that would keep her going. Will Thomas be back soon? Sam Morrison, the shopkeeper, asked as he tallied her purchases. Got a shipment of that tobacco he favors. Keep it for him, she said, counting out coins. He'll be back when his business is done. But as she loaded her supplies and started the ride home, Evelyn finally let the truth settle into her bones. Thomas wasn't on business. He wasn't coming back. Her husband had ridden away forever, leaving her alone in a harsh land that didn't forgive weakness. The wind picked up as she neared home, driving dust into her eyes. She pulled her hat lower and urged her horse on. There was work to be done, fence or no fence. The desert didn't care about broken hearts or missing husbands. It only respected those strong enough to survive. As she unsaddled her horse, Evelyn caught sight of the Callahan ranch in the distance. Smoke rose from the chimney, a sign of life in the vast emptiness. She'd accepted his help today, but tomorrow she'd stand on her own feet. She had to. It was the only way to survive when the person you'd trusted most had ridden away forever, leaving nothing but dust and memories in his wake. The drought had turned the grass brittle as old paper. Evelyn stood in what used to be the green pasture, watching her small herd of cattle nose desperately at the stubbled ground. 6 weeks had passed since Thomas rode away, and each day stretched longer than the last. She'd moved the cattle 3 times already this month, searching for any patch of grass that hadn't been burned away by the relentless sun. Her hands were raw from mending fences. Her back ached from hauling water, and her boots had worn so thin she could feel every stone through the soles. "Come on, Bessie," she called to the lead cow, trying to guide them toward the creek. At least there was still water, though it ran lower each day. The work of running a ranch alone was crushing. Tasks that Thomas had made look easy now consumed her entire day. She rose before dawn to milk, then fed the chickens, collected eggs, checked the horses, mended whatever had broken during the night, and tried to keep the vegetable garden from withering entirely. By the time she fell into bed each night, she was too exhausted even to cry. But it was the whispers in town that cut deepest. "Poor thing," she'd overheard Mrs. Wellington saying at the general store last week. "A woman alone can't possibly manage that land. She should sell while she still can." Thomas McGraw always was a wandering sort. Another woman had replied, no surprise he finally gave into it, though leaving a wife behind like that. Evelyn had grabbed her supplies and fled before she could hear more, but their words followed her home, echoing in the empty house. Now, watching her cattle search for grass that wasn't there, she wondered if they were right. Maybe she was a fool for trying to hold on. The ranch was bleeding money with each passing day. She'd already sold 2 horses to pay for feed, and soon she'd have to choose between selling cattle or letting them starve. A movement on the horizon caught her eye. A rider was approaching, and even at a distance, she recognized Rhett Callahan's solid frame. He'd been by twice since fixing her fence, always with some excuse returning a tool he'd borrowed, though she couldn't remember lending it, or warning her about wolves he'd spotted near the property line. "Mrs. Harper," he greeted, dismounting near the creek. "Mr. Callahan?" She tried to smooth her hair, painfully aware of how she must look dusty, exhausted, defeated. His gray eyes took in the scene, the desperate cattle, the dried creek bed, her worn appearance. "Drought's hitting everyone hard," he said carefully. "Some harder than others." The words came out bitter. He dismounted and walked to the creek's edge, studying the trickle of water. "I've got a spring on my property that's still running strong. Natural underground source. Your cattle are welcome to water there." Pride flared hot in her chest. "I don't need charity." "Not charity, just sense." His voice remained steady, unruffled by her sharp tone. "Your cattle die of thirst. You lose everything. Let them drink. Keep them alive until the rains come. And if the rains don't come..." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his expression that made her want to turn away. Understanding. Maybe, or worse, pity. "They always come eventually," he said. "Question is whether we're still standing when they do." Before she could respond, The sound of approaching horses made them both turn. A group of riders was coming from town, dust clouds rising behind them. As they drew closer, Evelyn recognized Marshal Donovan at the lead, his badge glinting in the harsh sun. Mrs. Harper, the marshal said, not bothering to dismount. He was a large man with cold blue eyes and a mustache that he kept waxed to perfect points. Heard you've been having troubles out here. Nothing I can't handle, Marshal. He made a show of looking around at the dying grass, the skinny cattle, the sagging barn door she hadn't had time to fix. That's so, because from where I'm sitting, seems like this place is falling apart. A woman alone can't manage a spread like this. It's not natural. Rhett shifted slightly, positioning himself between Evelyn and the marshal's horse. Mrs. Harper's managing fine. Donovan's eyes narrowed. This isn't your concern, Callahan, unless there's something between you two that makes it your business. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn felt heat rise to her cheeks, anger mixing with humiliation. Mr. Callahan is my neighbor, nothing more, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. And my ranch is my own business, Marshal, unless I've broken some law. Not yet. Donovan leaned forward in his saddle. But abandoned properties have a way of attracting unsavory elements, outlaws, vagrants, the like. Town council's been discussing the matter. Might be best for everyone if you considered selling. I know some men who'd make you a fair offer. The property isn't abandoned. I'm standing right here. For now. He straightened, touching his hat in a mockery of politeness. You think on it, Mrs. Harper. Offer won't stand forever. After they rode off, Evelyn stood frozen, hands clenched into fists. The vultures were circling already, waiting for her to fail. Don't let him rattle you, Rhett said quietly. She laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. Rattle me? He's right, isn't he? Look at this place. I can barely keep the cattle alive, much less turn a profit. Maybe I should just— You should bring your cattle to my spring, he interrupted. Today, before they get any weaker. She turned to face him, searching his face for any sign of the judgment she'd seen in Donovan's eyes. But there was only that steady calm that seemed to surround him like armor. Why are you helping me? She asked. He was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the dried landscape. My wife died 4 years ago, he said finally. Fever took her in 3 days. After she was gone, this whole territory felt empty as a tomb. Took me a long time to remember that the land doesn't care about our sorrows. It just keeps turning, keeps demanding. You either work it or it swallows you whole. He looked back at her. You're trying to work it. That's more than most would do. That afternoon, she drove her cattle to Rhett's spring. The journey took 2 hours under the blazing sun. But when they arrived, the sight of clear, abundant water made it worth every step. The cattle rushed forward, drinking deeply, and Evelyn felt something inside her unclench just a little. Rhett helped her set up a temporary fence to keep the cattle from wandering. They worked in comfortable silence, and Evelyn found herself stealing glances at him. There was something solid about him, unchangeable as the mountains in the distance. His movements were efficient, practiced, speaking of years of hard work. I'll pay you for the water, she said as they finished. No need. Though if you've got any of those preserved peaches you put up last summer, I wouldn't turn down a jar. She almost smiled. You remember my peaches? Thomas brought a jar over when we helped him raise his new barn. Best preserves I've had since, He trailed off. But she could fill in the blank. Since his wife died. They stood there as the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The cattle had settled near the water, finally content. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt like she could breathe. I should head back, she said reluctantly. Chickens need tending. I'll ride with you. Make sure you get home safe. She wanted to protest, to insist she didn't need protection. But the truth was, the ride home felt less lonely with him beside her. As they neared her ranch, Rhett suddenly held up his hand, signaling her to stop. Fresh horse tracks marked the dust near her gate, several riders, from the look of it. "Wait here," he said, but she followed anyway, hand moving to the rifle in her saddle scabbard. The riders were gone, but they'd left their mark. The chicken coop door hung open, and several birds lay scattered in the yard. Necks wrung. On the barn door, someone had painted words in what looked like tar, "Sell or suffer." Evelyn stared at the message, fury building in her chest like a thunderstorm. "Donovan's men." "Can't prove it," Rhett said grimly, "but I'd bet my best horse on it." She dismounted and began gathering the dead chickens, movements sharp with anger. 6 birds gone, that was 6 fewer eggs, 6 fewer meals. Every loss mattered when she was already balanced on a knife's edge. Rhett helped her clean up, then set about securing the coop. As he worked, Evelyn noticed the careful way he reinforced the door, adding an extra latch that would be harder to break. "They'll be back," she said. "Probably." He tested the door one more time. "You could stay at my place tonight, just until—" "No." The word came out firm. "I won't be driven off my own land. Not by Thomas leaving, not by Donovan's threats, not by anything." He studied her in the fading light. "You're sure? This is my home. I'll defend it or lose it, but I won't abandon it." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe, or respect. "Then I'll stay here tonight, sleep in the barn." She started to protest, but he held up a hand. "Not Charity. Mrs. Harper. Just a neighbor looking out for his interests. Your troubles have a way of becoming mine. Remember." That night, Evelyn lay awake listening to the sounds of the ranch. Every creak made her reach for the shotgun beside her bed, but knowing Rhett was in the barn, keeping watch, let her finally drift into uneasy sleep. She dreamed of Thomas, saw him riding through an endless desert, always just out of reach. In the dream, she called his name, but the wind stole her voice. He never looked back. When she woke at dawn, she found Rhett already up, feeding the surviving chickens. He'd also patched a hole in the coop she hadn't even noticed. "Any trouble?" she asked, wrapping her shawl tighter against the morning chill. "Quiet as a grave." He scattered the last of the feed. "But I think it's time we talked about fighting back. Against Donovan, he's the law." "He's a man with a badge," Rhett corrected. "And from what I've seen, he's got interests that go beyond keeping the peace. Question is, are you ready to stand up to him?" Evelyn looked around her ranch, the one Thomas had abandoned, the one Donovan wanted to steal, the one that was slowly killing her to maintain. Then she looked at Rhett, this quiet man who'd appeared in her life like an answered prayer she hadn't known she'd spoken. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The sandstorm hit just after sunset, turning the world into a howling wall of dust and fury. Evelyn had seen it building on the horizon all afternoon, a brown wall climbing into the sky like the wrath of God himself. She'd rushed to secure what she could, driving the horses into the barn, shuttering the windows, bringing in anything the wind might claim. But nothing could truly prepare for when it struck. The house shook on its foundations, dust forcing its way through every crack and crevice. The oil lamp flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows that made the familiar room seem foreign and threatening. Then came the crash loud enough to hear over the storm's roar. Evelyn grabbed her shawl and fought her way to the door. Squinting against the stinging sand, through the swirling dust, she could see part of her roof had torn away, wooden shingles scattered like playing cards. She was trying to secure a tarp over the hole when strong hands suddenly gripped her shoulders, pulling her back. "Are you insane?" Rhett's voice, barely audible over the wind. He'd appeared like a ghost from the storm, his hat gone, coat whipping around him. "The roof!" she shouted back. "We'll still be broken when the storm passes," You'll be dead trying to fix it now. He half dragged, half carried her back inside, slamming the door against the wind's fury. In the lamplight, she could see dust caking his face, turning his dark hair gray. "What are you doing here?" she gasped, wiping grit from her eyes. "Saw the storm coming. Knew that old roof of yours wouldn't hold." He moved through her house with surprising familiarity, checking windows, stuffing rags under doors. "Where's your storm cellar?" "Don't have one. Thomas always said he'd dig one. But—" She stopped, hating how often her sentences ended that way now. But Thomas never did. Another section of roof gave way with a splintering crack. Rain began to mix with the dust, creating mud that splattered through the gaps. Rhett grabbed her arm. "We need better shelter. Can you make it to the barn?" She nodded, and together they fought their way across the yard. The barn was sturdier, built low to the ground with thick walls. Inside, the horses whinnied nervously, but the structure held firm against the storm's assault. Rhett lit a lantern he found hanging on a peg, its warm glow pushing back the darkness. They stood there, catching their breath, soaked and muddy. Evelyn realized she was shaking from cold, fear, or exhaustion. She couldn't tell. "Here." Rhett shrugged off his coat, wrapping it around her shoulders. It smelled of leather and smoke and something uniquely him. "You'll freeze," she protested. "I've survived worse." He found some old horse blankets and shook them out, creating a makeshift seat on some hay bales. "Might as well get comfortable. This storm's got hours left in it." They sat close together, sharing warmth while the storm raged outside. The barn creaked and groaned but held strong. In the relative quiet, Evelyn became acutely aware of Rhett's presence beside her, the solid warmth of him. The way his breathing had steadied while hers still came quick and shallow. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming." He shifted slightly, and she could feel him looking at her in the dim light. "Couldn't leave you to face this alone." "I'm getting used to alone." The words slipped out before she could stop them. "No one gets used to alone," he said after a pause. "They just get better at pretending it doesn't hurt." Something in his voice made her look up at him. In the lantern light, she could see past his usual stoic expression to something rawer underneath. "Tell me about her." She found herself saying, "Your wife." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Margaret, Maggie, she was sunshine in a dress, always laughing, always finding the good in things. Even out here, in this hard place, she made it feel like home." His voice roughened. "The fever took her so fast. One day she was hanging laundry, singing like she always did. 3 days later, I was digging her grave. I wanted to die with her. Would've, maybe, if the ranch didn't need tending." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm sorry." 4 years now. Some days it feels like yesterday, others like a lifetime." He looked at her directly. "The pain doesn't go away, but it changes, becomes something you can carry instead of something that crushes you." "Thomas isn't dead," she said, surprising herself with the admission. "But sometimes I wish he was. At least then I'd know. At least then I could grieve properly instead of being stuck in this limbo." "He's a fool," Rhett said simply. "Riding away from you." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Evelyn suddenly realized how close they were sitting, how natural it felt to be here with him while the storm tried to tear the world apart outside. "I should check the house," she said, starting to rise. His hand on her arm stopped her. "Not yet. Storm's still too strong." She sank back down, and somehow ended up closer than before. His coat around her shoulders felt like an embrace. The rational part of her mind warned this was dangerous, a married woman alone with a man who wasn't her husband. But Thomas had forfeited his claims when he'd ridden away. Hadn't he? "Sometimes," she said quietly, "I forget what it feels like to not be afraid, to not wake up wondering how I'll manage everything alone." "You're not alone tonight," Rhett said. She looked up at him, and something shifted in the space between them. His hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were calloused but gentle. "Evelyn," he said, and hearing her given name on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. A massive crack of thunder made them both jump, breaking the moment. Part of the barn door had torn loose, banging wildly. Rhett cursed and jumped up to secure it, and Evelyn pressed her hands to her burning cheeks, trying to calm her racing heart. What was she doing? What was she thinking? She was a married woman, even if her husband had abandoned her. The town already whispered about her. If they knew Rhett had spent the night in her barn. But as she watched him struggle with the door, risking himself to protect her property, she realized she didn't care what the town thought. They'd already judged her, already decided she was a woman who couldn't keep her man. What did their opinions matter against the reality of someone who showed up in a storm? Together, they managed to secure the door. The worst of the storm seemed to be passing, though wind and rain still battered the walls. They returned to their makeshift seat, but the earlier intimacy had shifted into something more careful. "Sun'll be up in a few hours," Rhett said. "We can assess the damage then." "It'll be bad, won't it?" He didn't lie to her. "Probably, but fixable. Everything's fixable with enough work." They talked through the remaining hours, safe topics like cattle prices and the best methods for preserving meat. But underneath the mundane conversation ran an awareness, electric as the storm outside. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, carried weight. When dawn finally broke, pale and washed clean, they emerged to survey the damage. The house had fared worse than Evelyn feared, half the roof gone, the interior soaked with mud and rain. The chicken coop had blown apart entirely, though miraculously most of the birds had survived by huddling under the barn. "It's ruined," Evelyn said, staring at her destroyed home. "It's damaged," Rhett corrected. "We can salvage most of the structure. I've got spare shingles, and between us we can—" She turned to him. "Rhett, you can't keep rescuing me. People are already talking." His jaw set stubbornly. "Let them talk. You need help, and I'm offering, unless you'd rather wait for Donovan to swoop in with another offer." The mention of the marshal made her spine stiffen. She looked at her ruined house, then at Rhett Steady, solid Rhett, who'd ridden through a killing storm to make sure she was safe. "All right," she said, "but I'm paying you back. Every board, every nail, every hour of work." "If that's what you need," he agreed. They spent the morning doing what could be done immediately, covering the worst gaps, salvaging what possessions had survived. When Rhett finally rode back to his own ranch to check on his property, Evelyn stood in her ruined kitchen, water still dripping through the ceiling. But for the first time since Thomas had left, she didn't feel defeated. Her hands were cut and bleeding from handling broken wood. Her dress was ruined beyond repair, and she had no idea where she'd sleep tonight. Yet something had shifted during those long hours in the barn. She wasn't alone, and maybe that was the most dangerous realization of all. That afternoon, Adelaide Hutchins arrived like a vulture to carrion, picking her way through the mud in her fancy boots. "Oh, my dear," she exclaimed, surveying the damage with poorly concealed glee. "What a disaster. And I heard Mr. Callahan spent the entire night here, in the storm. Of course," she added with a meaningful look. "In the barn," Evelyn said flatly, "helping me save what stock I could." Of course. Still, people do talk. A woman in your situation needs to be especially careful about appearances." Evelyn set down the board she'd been carrying and faced the older woman. "My situation? You mean having a roof torn off in a storm? Having a husband who's away on business?" Adelaide's smile was sharp as glass. "It must be so difficult, managing alone. Perhaps it would be best if I sold to Marshal Donovan's friends," Evelyn finished. Tell me, Adelaide, does he pay you directly for spreading his message? Or do you just enjoy watching other women fail? Adelaide's face flushed red. Well, I came here to offer Christian sympathy and— You came here to gloat and gossip. Now get off my property before I forget my Christian manners entirely. After the woman huffed away, Evelyn sank onto the porch steps, sudden tears threatening. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night and morning was fading, leaving only exhaustion and the monumental task ahead. That's how Rhett found her an hour later when he returned with a wagon full of lumber and supplies. Without a word, he sat beside her on the steps, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not touching. I may have run off the town's biggest gossip, she said finally. About time someone did. He handed her a canteen of water. Drink. You look ready to fall over. She took a long swallow, then said quietly, They're all just waiting for me to fail, to prove a woman can't do this alone. Then we'll prove them wrong. Rhett? She turned to face him. Last night, in the barn, nothing happened that shouldn't have, he said firmly. I helped a neighbor in need. That's all anyone needs to know. But his eyes said differently. His eyes said he'd felt it too, that pull between them, that moment when comfort could have become something else entirely. People will still talk, she said. Let them. He stood, offering her his hand. Right now. We've got a roof to fix. The rest can wait. She took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm and steady, and she held on perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, she said, for everything. He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. That's what neighbors do. But they both knew they'd moved beyond being just neighbors. The storm had blown away more than shingles and boards. It had torn through the careful distance between them, leaving something raw and new in its wake. As they worked side by side through the afternoon, Evelyn found herself stealing glances at him, the way his shirt pulled across his shoulders as he lifted boards, the patient way he showed her how to properly set a nail, the small smile when she got it right. She was in trouble, deep trouble, and for the first time in months, she didn't care. The sun was setting by the time they'd managed to get temporary covering over the worst of the damage. It wouldn't hold against another storm, but it would keep the house dry for now. I should go, Rhett said, gathering his tools. Early start tomorrow if we want to get proper repairs done. Unless you've learned to set roof beams on your own since this morning. His tone was teasing, but his eyes remained serious. I'll be back at dawn. Try to get some rest. After he left, Evelyn surveyed her damaged home. Water stains marked the walls, mud caked the floors, and half her belongings were ruined beyond salvage. But she felt strangely light, almost hopeful. She thought of Thomas, wherever he was, tried to summon the familiar ache of abandonment. Instead, she felt only a distant sadness, like mourning someone who died years ago. I thought he'd come back, she whispered to the empty house, echoing her words from that night in the barn. But he never will. And maybe, just maybe, that was for the best. The whispers followed Evelyn through town like tumbleweeds in the wind. 2 weeks had passed since the storm, and in that time, Rhett had been at her ranch nearly every day, helping rebuild what the winds had torn away. The roof was patched, stronger than before, and the fence stood straight and true, but with each improvement came more gossip. Shameless, she heard Mrs. Abernathy hiss to her companion outside the mercantile. Her husband barely cold on the trail, and she's already taken up with the Callahan man. Evelyn kept her chin high as she passed. Though the words stung like sand in a cut, inside the store, the atmosphere was no better. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when she entered. Eyes followed her movements as she gathered flour and coffee, needles and thread. Sam Morrison tallied her purchases with unusual silence, his normal friendliness replaced by cool professionalism. Even he, who'd known her since she'd arrived as Thomas's bride 5 years ago, seemed to have chosen a side. "That'll be $2.30, he said, not meeting her eyes. As she counted out coins, the bell above the door chimed. Marshal Donovan entered, his presence filling the store like smoke from a poorly tended fire. He touched his hat to the other customers, all women who suddenly found urgent business examining bolts of fabric before approaching the counter. "Mrs. Harper," he said, voice carrying so everyone could hear. "Still trying to run that ranch alone, I see." "Not alone," she replied evenly. "I have good neighbors." "So I've heard." His smile was cold as winter wind. "One neighbor in particular. Seems like folks are talking." "Folks always talk. It's what keeps them from examining their own sins too closely." A sharp intake of breath from Mrs. Abernathy. Donovan's eyes narrowed. "A woman needs to be careful about her reputation in a town like this," he said. "Especially a woman whose husband has business elsewhere. Wouldn't want people getting the wrong idea about what kind of establishment you're running out there." The implication made her blood burn. "Are you threatening me, Marshal?" "Advising, as a concerned citizen." He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "That offer for your land still stands. Be smart, Mrs. Harper. Take the money and find somewhere more suitable for a woman alone." "I'm not alone," she repeated, louder this time. "I have neighbors who help me. If that's a crime, then arrest me. Otherwise, step aside. I have work to do." She pushed past him, head high, but her hands shook as she loaded her supplies into the wagon. The whole town was watching, judging, waiting for her to fall. The ride home felt longer than usual. When she finally crested the ridge overlooking her property, she saw Rhett's horse tied to the fence post. He was on the roof, hammering new shingles into place, shirt sleeves rolled up despite the afternoon heat. He climbed down when he saw her, taking the reins as she pulled up to the barn. "Trouble in town?" he asked, noting her expression. "Just the usual friendly Christian concern," she said bitterly. "Apparently, accepting help from a neighbor makes me a scarlet woman." His jaw tightened. "Donovan!" "Among others, the whole town's convinced we're—" She couldn't finish the sentence, heat rising to her cheeks. "Let them think what they want," Rhett said, but she noticed he kept a careful distance as he helped her unload supplies. The easy camaraderie of the past 2 weeks had shifted, both of them suddenly aware of how their actions might be interpreted. "Maybe you shouldn't come by so often," she said quietly, hating the words even as she spoke them. "I don't want to damage your reputation, too." He stopped mid-motion, setting down a sack of flour with deliberate care. "My reputation," a harsh laugh. "Evelyn, I'm a widower who drinks too much whiskey and talks to his dead wife's grave. My reputation was gone long before I started helping you." "This is different. People understand grief. They don't understand." She gestured helplessly between them. "Don't understand what neighbors helping each other. You know it's more than that." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Silence stretched between them, taut as new fence wire. Then Rhett stepped closer, still not touching but near enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "Is it?" he asked softly. "Is it more than that? Evelyn?" She should say no, should step back, rebuild the walls between them. Instead, she found herself swaying forward, drawn like a moth to flame. The sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. They sprang apart as 3 riders came into view, rough-looking men she didn't recognize. Led by someone she did, Jake Turner, one of Donovan's deputies, grinned unpleasantly as he surveyed the scene. Well, working hard, I see." His eyes lingered on Evelyn in a way that made her skin crawl. "Marshall sent us to check on things, make sure there's no illegal activity happening out here." "Since when is fixing a roof illegal?" Rhett asked, voice dangerously quiet. "Depends on what else is being fixed, doesn't it?" Turner dismounted, walking slowly around the yard like he owned it. "Nice place. Shame if something happened to it." "Is that a threat?" Evelyn demanded. "Just an observation. Accidents happen on remote ranches. Fires start. Cattle go missing." He picked up a hammer from Rhett's toolbox, testing its weight. Course, the marshal's friends wouldn't have such problems. They'd have protection. Rhett moved so smoothly, Evelyn barely saw it. One moment Turner was smirking. The next, he was pressed against the barn wall with Rhett's forearm across his throat. "Touch anything on this property again," Rhett said calmly, "and you'll need protection from me." Turner's men reached for their guns, but stopped when they saw Evelyn had retrieved the shotgun from her wagon, barrel steady despite her racing heart. "I think you gentlemen should leave," she said. "Now?" Turner shoved away from Rhett, straightening his vest with shaking hands. "Big mistake. Callahan, you two, Mrs. Harper. The marshal doesn't like being crossed." After they rode off, Evelyn realized she was trembling. The shotgun suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Rhett gently took it from her hands, setting it aside before gripping her shoulders. "You did good," he said. "Steady as any ranch hand I've known." "They'll be back." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "With more men, probably." Probably. His hands were warm through the thin fabric of her dress. "But you won't face them alone." "Rhett." She looked up at him, seeing her own fears and desires reflected in his eyes. "This is getting dangerous. Not just the threats, but us. What's happening between us?" His hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. "You want me to stay away?" The rational answer was yes. The safe answer was yes. But looking at him, this man who'd stood between her and danger without hesitation, who'd spent weeks rebuilding her home, asking nothing in return, who looked at her like she was something precious instead of pitiable, she couldn't form the word. "No," she whispered. Something shifted in his expression, walls crumbling like adobe in rain. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing over her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "Evelyn," he said, and her name was a prayer on his lips. "Tell me to stop." "I can't." The admission broke something open inside her. "I know I should, but I can't." He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met, soft at first, tentative, as if they were both remembering how this was supposed to work. Then her hands came up to grip his shirt, and he pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something desperate and necessary. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. Everything looked the same: the barn, the house, the endless stretch of desert, but nothing would ever be quite as it was before. "I should go," Rhett said roughly, though he made no move to release her. "Should you?" He laughed, short and pained. "No, but if I stay much longer, we'll give this town something real to gossip about." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself as if cold despite the heat. "What are we doing, Rhett?" "I don't know." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it disheveled. "All I know is I can't seem to stay away from you, even when I know I should." "I'm still married." The words tasted like ashes. "In the eyes of the law, the church, everyone, Thomas could ride back tomorrow and—" "He won't." Rhett's certainty cut through her rambling. "Men like Thomas don't come back. They're always chasing something just over the horizon, never satisfied with what they have." His eyes softened. "The fool had you and threw it away for dust and dreams." Tears burned her eyes. "Sometimes I hate him for leaving. Sometimes I hate myself more for not being enough to make him stay." Rhett crossed to her in 2 strides, framing her face with his hands. "Listen to me. His leaving had nothing to do with you not being enough. Some men are born with empty spaces inside them that nothing can fill. Not love, not land, not all the gold in California. That's his failing, not yours." She covered his hands with hers, holding them against her cheeks. I'm scared. Rhett, scared of what people will say, what they'll do, scared of feeling this way about you when everything in my life is already so uncertain. I know. He pressed his forehead to hers, their breath mingling. We'll be careful. Take things slow. But Evelyn, I'm not going anywhere. Whatever comes, Donovan. The town, your ghosts or mine, will face it together. A hawk cried overhead, circling in the endless blue. Evelyn watched it for a moment, envying its freedom, before stepping reluctantly away from Rhett's embrace. You should go, she said softly, before we give Turner more ammunition. He nodded, though clearly reluctant. As he gathered his tools, Evelyn noticed he'd fixed more than just the roof. The chicken coop had new hinges. The barn door no longer sagged, and he'd even repaired the broken step she'd been meaning to fix for months. Thank you, she said as he mounted his horse. For everything. He touched his hat brim, a gesture that was becoming achingly familiar. I'll be back tomorrow. Keep that shotgun handy tonight. After he rode away, Evelyn stood in her yard, one hand pressed to her lips where the memory of his kiss still lingered. She was a married woman who'd kissed a man not her husband, and she felt no guilt, only a wild, dangerous hope. That night, she sat by her window with the shotgun across her lap, watching the darkness for any sign of Turner's promised trouble. But the night remained quiet, except for the usual sounds: coyotes in the distance, wind through the gaps in the walls, her own heart beating too fast whenever she thought of gray eyes and gentle hands. Near dawn, exhaustion finally overtook her. She dozed in her chair, dreaming of storms and strong arms, of a voice saying her name like a benediction. When she woke to sunlight streaming through the window, there was a single wildflower on her doorstep, desert marigold, bright as hope against the worn wood. No note, no sign of who'd left it. But she knew. Pressing the flower between the pages of her Bible, Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. Whatever the town thought, whatever threats Donovan made, she wasn't facing it alone anymore. The rancher next door had taught her more than how to survive. He was teaching her how to live again. The cattle were gone. Evelyn stood at the edge of the pasture, staring at the cut fence wires and the empty field beyond. 20 head, all she had left after selling some to pay for supplies. The tracks led north, toward the canyon lands where a dozen men could hide an entire herd. Her hands shook as she gripped the fence post. Without those cattle, she had nothing. No way to pay the remaining debts, no breeding stock for next year, no hope of keeping the ranch running. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn. Rhett was riding hard from the direction of his ranch, dust clouding behind him. He pulled up sharp, taking in the scene with one sweeping glance. When? He asked. Sometime in the night, I was watching the front of the property, like we planned. They must have come from the back trail. Her voice broke. They took everything, Rhett, every last one. He dismounted, examining the cut wires and the tracks. His face was grim. These are shod horses, at least 6 riders, maybe more. They knew exactly what they were doing. Turner, she said bitterly. Has to be. He all but promised something like this. Rhett straightened, his gray eyes hard as flint. Then we go get them back. Just the 2 of us against 6 men or more. I've got ammunition at my place. You know how to ride hard. She thought of her cattle, her livelihood, being driven away by thieves in the night. Thought of Donovan's smug face, of Turner's threats. I can keep up. They rode to Rhett's ranch first, where he loaded saddlebags with ammunition and supplies. Evelyn had never been inside his house before, and even in her urgency, she noticed the touches of a woman's hand, long absent faded curtains, a dusty quilt, a painting of wildflowers on the wall. Take this, he said, handing her a rifle. Better range than your shotgun. Rhett, if something happens... He stopped her with a look. Nothing's going to happen except we're getting your cattle back. Mount up. They picked up the trail easily enough. The thieves hadn't bothered to hide their tracks. confident in their numbers and the isolated location. The path led into the Badlands, through narrow canyons and dry washes where the noon sun beat down mercilessly. 3 hours later, Rhett raised a hand for quiet. The wind carried the distant sound of cattle lowing ahead. They dismounted, fastening their horses to a patch of mesquite before quietly moving forward on foot. The canyon opened into a natural corral where her cattle milled restlessly. 5 men lounged in the shade of an overhang, passing a bottle between them. Turner sat apart, cleaning his pistol with lazy confidence. 5, not 6, Rhett whispered. One must be on watch somewhere. Still too many. He studied the scene, calculating. See that ridge? If you can get up there with the rifle, you'll have a clear shot at anyone who tries to run. I'll come in from the other side. Use the rocks for cover. Rhett, no, it's too dangerous. His hand covered hers where it gripped the rifle. Trust me, when I start shooting, you pin them down from above. Don't let them get to their horses. She wanted to argue, but the determined look in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she squeezed his hand. Be careful. You too. Evelyn made her way up the ridge, heart pounding with each careful step. The rifle felt heavy in her hands, but she'd hunted with Thomas enough to know her way around it. She found a good position behind a boulder, sighting down at the camp below. Rhett emerged from the opposite direction, using every bit of cover. He was almost in position when the crack of a rifle split the air. The 6th man the lookout had spotted him. Everything happened fast. Rhett dove behind a rock as bullets sparked off the stone. The men below scrambled for weapons. Turner was shouting orders, trying to organize them. Evelyn didn't think. She aimed and fired, her shot catching the lookout in the shoulder, spinning him around. She worked the lever, fired again, keeping the men below pinned as they tried to reach their horses. Rhett was returning fire now, his shots precise and deadly. One man fell, clutching his leg. Another threw down his gun, hands raised in surrender. Turner made a break for it, running for the horses. Evelyn tracked him with her rifle. Finger on the trigger. One shot, and the man who'd threatened her, stolen from her, would never hurt anyone again. Don't, Rhett's voice carried across the canyon. We need him alive. She hesitated, and in that moment Turner reached his horse. But instead of fleeing, he wheeled around. Pistol aimed at Rhett's position. Evelyn didn't hesitate this time. Her shot caught Turner's gun hand, sending the pistol flying. He screamed, falling from his horse to writhe in the dust. When the gun smoke cleared, 2 rustlers were down with wounds. 2 had surrendered, and 1 had fled on foot into the desert. Turner sat cradling his shattered hand, face pale with pain and rage. Rhett emerged from cover, keeping his gun trained on the survivors as he approached. Anyone else moves, they join their friends. Understood. The men nodded quickly. Evelyn made her way down from the ridge, rifle still ready. Her hands were steady now, all fear burned away by action. You all right? Rhett asked when she reached him. Fine. She looked at Turner, who glared back with undisguised hatred. What do we do with them? Take them back to town. Let them explain to Judge Morrison how they came to be driving stolen cattle through the canyons. He smiled grimly. Going to be hard for Donovan to explain why his deputy was leading a gang of rustlers. They tied the wounded men to their horses, hands bound tight. The cattle were harder to manage with just 2 riders, but Evelyn's horse knew the work, and they slowly drove the herd back toward home. Turner rode in sullen silence until they were almost to her ranch. Then he spoke, voice tight with pain. You think you've won something? Donovan's got the whole town council in his pocket. Judge will let us go, and then you'll pay for this. Both of you. Maybe, Rhett said calmly. Or maybe folks are tired of a marshal who protects thieves instead of honest ranchers. Back at Evelyn's ranch, they secured the prisoners in her barn while Rhett rode to town for the sheriff from the neighboring county, a man with no love for Donovan. Evelyn stood guard, rifle across her knees, watching Turner's pale face in the lamplight. "He won't stay," Turner said suddenly. "What?" "Callahan. He won't stay. His kind never does. Soon as things get too hard or too complicated, he'll ride off just like your husband did, leave you with nothing but trouble and a ruined reputation." The words hit closer than she wanted to admit. "You don't know anything about him, or me." Turner laughed, an ugly sound. "I know men, and I know women like you, thinking they're strong enough to make it alone. You'll learn different. This land breaks everyone eventually." "Shut up," she said quietly, but he'd planted the seed of doubt. When Rhett returned with Sheriff Coleman and a deputy, the sun was setting. They took statements, examined the evidence, and loaded the prisoners for transport to the county seat where Donovan had no influence. "This is going to cause a stir," Coleman warned. "Donovan won't take it lying down. You both need to be careful." After they left, Evelyn and Rhett stood in her yard, suddenly awkward in the quiet evening. The danger had passed, leaving only the awareness of what they'd done together and what it meant. "You saved my life today," Rhett said. "That shot at Turner." "You saved mine first, and my cattle, my ranch." She looked up at him. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed." He stepped closer, and she could see the weariness in his eyes, the strain of the day's violence. "Partners don't keep score. Is that what we are, partners?" The word hung between them, loaded with possibility. Rhett reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "I don't know what we are," he admitted. "But I know that when I saw that fence cut this morning, when I thought about what they might do to you if you'd tried to stop them," his voice roughened. "I've already lost one woman I loved. I won't lose another." The word loved made her heart skip. "Rhett." He kissed her then, fierce and desperate, as if he could pour all his fear and relief into that one point of contact. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands gripping his shirt, anchoring herself to his solid presence. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me tonight," he said quietly. Not like that, just, I need to know you're safe." She thought of propriety, of reputation, of all the reasons she should say no. Then she thought of Turner's threats, of empty houses and lonely nights, of the way Rhett had looked facing down 5 armed men to get her cattle back. "All right," she whispered. They sat on her porch as darkness fell, not touching but close enough to feel each other's warmth. The cattle lowed softly in the pasture, safely home. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "Turner said something," Evelyn began carefully, "about you leaving when things get hard." Rhett was quiet for a long moment. "I told you before some men ride away forever. I'm not one of them." He looked at her in the dim light. "I've got roots here, deep ones, a wife buried on the hill, a ranch I built with my own hands, and now I've got a partner who shoots like Annie Oakley and rides like the devil himself is chasing her." A small smile played at his lips. "Why would I leave that?" She laughed despite herself, the tension breaking. "Annie Oakley. You should have seen yourself on that ridge. Magnificent." His voice dropped. "You are magnificent." Evelyn Harper. Heat rose to her cheeks. I was terrified. "So was I, but we did it anyway. That's what courage is." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, brilliant in the clear desert sky. Evelyn found herself thinking not of Thomas, or the town's gossip, or even the danger still lurking. Instead, she thought of partnership, of someone to face the storms with, of a hand reaching out in the darkness. "I should check the horses," Rhett said eventually, but made no move to rise. "In a minute," Evelyn said, daringly reaching over to take his hand. His fingers intertwined with hers, calloused and strong. They sat like that, hands clasped, as the night deepened around them. It was improper. It was dangerous. It was perfect. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Donovan's rage. The town's judgment, the endless work of keeping the ranch alive. But tonight, she had her cattle back, her land secured, and a good man beside her. The rancher next door had taught her to burn again, not just with passion, but with fierce determination to fight for what was hers. And she was just getting started. The full moon hung low over the desert, casting silver light across the sand and sage. Evelyn stood at her bedroom window, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. 3 days had passed since they'd recovered her cattle. 3 days of careful distance between her and Rhett, despite the fire that had been lit between them. He still came by to help with the work, but now he kept a proper distance, rarely meeting her eyes for more than a moment. The easy companionship of before had been replaced by something charged and careful, like the air before a lightning storm. She pressed her fingers to the glass, remembering the warmth of his hand in hers. The memory alone was enough to send heat coursing through her veins. This was madness. She was a married woman, abandoned but not freed. Yet every time she tried to summon Thomas's face, it blurred like a mirage, replaced by gray eyes and steady hands. A sound from outside made her tense. Hoofbeats, slow and careful. She reached for the rifle beside her bed, then relaxed as she recognized the rider's silhouette in the moonlight. Rhett. She threw a shawl over her nightdress and hurried downstairs, opening the door before he could knock. "What's wrong?" she asked, taking in his troubled expression. "Donovan's back in town. Brought a judge from the capital with him." He dismounted, looping his horse's reins over the porch rail. "Word is they're going to overturn Turner's arrest, claim we had no right to pursue the rustlers ourselves. But they had my cattle. Doesn't matter if the judge is in Donovan's pocket." He ran a hand through his hair, agitation clear in every line of his body. "There's more. They're putting it about town that you and I—" He stopped, jaw clenching. That we what? Though she could guess. His eyes finally met hers, dark with anger and something else. "That we've been carrying on. That you drove Thomas away with your wanton behavior, and now you've seduced me into helping you keep land you've no right to." The words hit like a physical blow. "Wanton behavior, I've done nothing but try to survive after my husband abandoned me." "I know that, you know that, but Donovan's painting a picture for the town, and plenty are ready to believe it." He stepped closer, and she could see the strain around his eyes. "Evelyn, they're going to come for the ranch, legal-like this time, and they're going to use our friendship as weapon against you." She laughed bitterly. "Friendship? Is that what we're calling it?" "What else can we call it?" His voice roughened. "You're still married. I'm falling in love with another man's wife." The words hung between them like a confession. Evelyn's heart raced as she looked up at him. This good man who'd stood by her when everyone else would see her fail. "Thomas left me," she said quietly. "He made his choice. Why should I be bound by vows he broke?" "Because the world doesn't see it that way. Because if we—" He stopped, hands clenching at his sides. "If we act on what's between us, we prove Donovan right, give him the ammunition to destroy you. And if we don't—" She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "If we keep pretending there's nothing between us, I'm tired of pretending, Rhett, tired of being careful and proper and alone." "Evelyn," she silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. "Do you know what the worst part of Thomas leaving was? It wasn't the work or the fear or even the shame. It was the emptiness. Going to bed alone, waking alone, no one to share the small victories or defeats with. And then you came along, and suddenly I wasn't empty anymore." His eyes closed, and she felt him tremble under her touch. "You're killing me," he whispered against her fingers. "The rancher next door taught me to burn again," she said, echoing the thought she'd had so many times. Not just with anger at injustice, but with life. Rhett, with wanting something beyond mere survival. He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. If we do this, I know the risks. Do you really? Because I've already buried one woman I loved? I won't. I can't. She rose on her toes and kissed him, pouring all her frustration and longing into the contact. For a moment, he stood frozen. Then his arms came around her, crushing her against him as he deepened the kiss. When they broke apart, both breathing raggedly, he buried his face in her hair. This is madness. Yes, she agreed, her hands fisting in his shirt. Beautiful madness. He pulled back to look at her, and in the moonlight she could see the war in his eyes, desire battling with honor, need against propriety. Come inside, she whispered. Evelyn? Just to talk, to be together without the weight of watching eyes. Please. He hesitated, then nodded. She led him to the parlor, lighting a lamp with shaking hands. In the warm glow, he looked younger, vulnerable in a way daylight never showed. They sat on the small sofa, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. For a long moment, neither spoke. Tell me about her, Evelyn said finally. Margaret, tell me what she was like. Surprise flickered across his face. Why? Because she was part of you. Because understanding her helps me understand you. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then she loved to dance. Even when there was no music, she'd hum and spin around the kitchen while cooking. Said life was too short not to dance when you felt like it. A small smile played at his lips. She couldn't shoot to save her life, but she could break a horse better than any man I knew. Had this way with them, gentle but firm. They'd follow her anywhere. She sounds wonderful. She was, but Evelyn... He turned to face her fully. She's gone. And as much as I loved her, as much as I grieved her, she's gone. You're here. You're real and brave and so damn beautiful it takes my breath away. Heat flooded her cheeks. Rhett, no, let me finish. Because if we're going to do this, whatever this is, I need you to know. I'm not looking for a replacement for Margaret. I'm not trying to fill some void. What I feel for you, it's different, fiercer. Maybe because we both know how quickly things can be lost. She took his hand, intertwining their fingers. I'm not looking for a replacement either. Thomas and I, we were children playing at being adults. He wanted adventure more than he wanted me, and I wanted security more than I wanted him. What we had was never what? She met his eyes. Never fire. Never this feeling like I might die if you don't touch me. His breath caught. Evelyn, I know we should be careful. I know the smart thing would be to keep our distance until things are resolved. But I'm tired of doing the smart thing. I'm tired of being proper and patient and alone. He reached out, cupping her face with one calloused hand. You're not alone. Not anymore. Whatever happens with Donovan, with the ranch, with everything, you're not alone. She turned her face into his palm, pressing a kiss there. Stay with me. We don't have to. Just stay. Hold me. Let me pretend for one night that the world isn't waiting to judge us. He pulled her against him, and she curled into his chest, listening to his heartbeat. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and for the first time in months, she felt truly safe. I should hate him, she said into the darkness. Thomas, for leaving, for making me feel like I wasn't enough. But I can't, because if he hadn't left, we wouldn't have found each other. Rhett finished. Does that make me terrible? His arms tightened. Makes you human. We can't choose who leaves us, but we can choose what we do after. They stayed like that as the night deepened, sharing stories and silences with equal comfort. He told her about the war, about coming home to find everything changed. She told him about growing up back east, about following Thomas West with dreams of adventure that turned to dust. "I used to think the desert was empty," she said, drowsy now in his warmth. "Just sand and struggle. But it's not. It's full of life, if you know how to look. Plants that bloom after the briefest rain. Animals that thrive where nothing should. Beauty in the harshest places." "Like you," he murmured against her hair. She tilted her head back to look at him. "Like us." This kiss was different, slower, deeper, a promise rather than a plea. When it ended, they were both trembling. "I should go," he said, though he made no move to release her. "I know. If anyone saw my horse—" "I know." Still, neither moved. Finally, Evelyn forced herself to pull away. "When will I see you again?" "Tomorrow. We'll face whatever Donovan has planned. Together." He stood, pulling her up with him. "But Evelyn, we need to be careful. In public. We have to—" "Be proper, distant, I understand." She walked him to the door, her hand in his. "But not here, when it's just us. We don't pretend." He kissed her once more at the doorway, a fierce, quick press of lips that left her breathless. Then he was gone, riding into the darkness. Evelyn stood on the porch long after the sound of hoofbeats faded. Her lips still tingled from his kisses, her body still warm from his embrace. She knew the morning would bring fresh challenges, Donovan's schemes, the town's judgment, the endless struggle to keep her land. But for the first time since Thomas had ridden away, she felt ready to face it all. The rancher next door had taught her to burn again, and that fire would see her through whatever came next. She pressed her fingers to her lips, smiling into the darkness. Let them come with their laws and lies. She had cattle in her pasture, a rifle in her hands, and a good man at her side. The desert had taught her to survive. Rhett had taught her to live, and she was done with merely surviving. As she finally went inside, a coyote howled in the distance, wild and free and unashamed. Evelyn smiled wider. Tomorrow, she'd show this town what a woman could do when she stopped being afraid of their judgment. Tonight, though, she held the memory of strong arms and whispered promises close to her heart, a secret flame that no amount of disapproval could extinguish. The smoke was visible from a mile away, a black column rising into the morning sky like an accusation. Evelyn spurred her horse harder, heart hammering against her ribs. She'd left at dawn to check the water tanks at the far edge of her property. Now, racing back, she could see the orange glow dancing against the smoke. The barn. They'd set fire to her barn. By the time she reached the yard, the structure was fully engulfed. Flames licked at the sky, sending burning debris swirling through the air. The horses, thank God she'd turned them out to pasture that morning. But the hay, the tools, the saddles and tack, all of it burning. Evelyn. She turned to see Rhett riding hard from the north, his face grim with urgency. He pulled up beside her, taking in the scene with one sweeping glance. "Anyone hurt?" he asked. "No, I was out checking." She broke off as movement near the house caught her eye. Marshal Donovan stood on her porch, badge glinting in the firelight, with Judge Harrington beside him. 4 deputies flanked them, hands resting on their guns. "Mrs. Harper," Donovan called out, voice carrying over the roar of the flames. "Terrible accident. These old barns, dry wood. Single spark is all it takes." "This was no accident," Evelyn said, dismounting slowly. Rhett stayed mounted, she noticed, keeping the high ground. Now. Judge Harrington stepped forward, a thin man with cold eyes behind wire spectacles. "That's a serious accusation, unless you have proof." "The proof is that building burning after you threatened me." "I never threatened anyone," Donovan said smoothly. "I offered to help a widow in distress. Still offering. In fact, this fire proves you can't manage this property alone. Lucky we were passing by. Saw the smoke. Hate to think what might have happened if it had spread to the house. The implied threat hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. State your business, Rhett said quietly, but his voice carried an edge sharp as a blade. Harrington produced a document from his coat. I have here a legal notice. Given the dangerous conditions on this property, the repeated incidents of violence, and questions about Mrs. Harper's moral fitness to own land, we're initiating proceedings to have this ranch declared abandoned and subject to public auction. Moral fitness, Evelyn's voice rose. Because my husband left me. Because you've been living in sin with Mr. Callahan here, Donovan said bluntly. Whole town knows it. Shameful behavior, unfit for a woman. Judge agrees that such scandalous conduct endangers the community standards. That's a lie, Rhett said. But Evelyn could see the trap closing. They'd been careful, but not careful enough. Is it? Donovan smiled coldly. Your horse has been seen at her property all hours. You've been practically living here since her husband went on business. Neighbors help each other, Evelyn said. Or has that become illegal too? Nothing illegal about neighbors. Harrington adjusted his spectacles. But when an abandoned woman takes up with a man not her husband, well, that's a different matter. Shows poor judgment, the kind that might lead to her property becoming a haven for outlaws and undesirable elements. You mean like the deputy who was stealing my cattle? Evelyn shot back. Donovan's face darkened. Turner's been cleared of all charges. Misunderstanding, unlike the very clear evidence of immoral conduct here. What evidence? Rhett demanded. Donovan nodded to one of his deputies, who produced a flour sack. From it, he pulled a woman's hairbrush, a torn piece of petticoat, and Evelyn's heart sank one of Rhett's work shirts. Found these at Mr. Callahan's residence, the deputy said. Sure looks like a woman's been staying there. They were Evelyn's things. All right, stolen from her clothesline 2 weeks back. She'd thought the wind had taken them. Now she understood. You planted those, she said flatly. Prove it, Donovan challenged. Just like you can't prove we set this fire, but a judge and marshal finding evidence of immoral behavior. That's different. That's grounds for action. You have 10 days, Harrington said, holding out the notice. 10 days to either produce your husband to refute abandonment, or to vacate the property voluntarily. Otherwise, we'll be forced to remove you. And if she doesn't, Rhett asked quietly. Donovan's hand moved to his gun. Then we enforce the law, whatever that takes. The barn roof collapsed with a massive crash, sending a shower of sparks into the sky. Evelyn felt something inside her collapse with it. They'd burned her barn, stolen her belongings, twisted the law into a weapon against her, and all because she dared to survive without a man's name to protect her. Get off my land, she said, voice steady despite the rage building inside her. Now. 10 days, Harrington repeated, dropping the notice at her feet. Be smart. Mrs. Harper, take whatever offer comes your way. After they rode off, Evelyn stood staring at the burning ruins of her barn. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built, crumbling to ash. Evelyn? Rhett dismounted, reaching for her. Don't, she stepped back. They're watching, even now. They're probably watching. Let them watch. He caught her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. We're going to fight this. How they have the law, the judge, the town opinion, and they're not wrong, we have been. She gestured helplessly between them. What we feel for each other, it's real, but it's also exactly what they'll use to destroy me. Then we make it legal. She stared at him. What? Marry me. The words came out rushed, desperate. If you're my wife, they can't use propriety against you. We'll find a judge in another county. Get it done quick. I'm already married. The words tore from her throat. Thomas may have left, but in the eyes of the law, I'm still Mrs. Thomas Harper. And they know it. Rhett's face went pale. In all their careful dancing around their feelings, they'd never fully confronted this fundamental truth. She couldn't marry him, couldn't publicly claim him, couldn't be anything more than the abandoned wife pining for her wayward husband. There has to be a way, he said. Abandonment proceedings, divorce, which takes years, and judges like Harrington to approve. She laughed bitterly. Don't you see they've won? They've found the perfect weapon against us? The fire had died down to smoldering ruins. Evelyn walked closer, staring at the twisted metal that used to be her plow, the blackened beams that had held so many harvests. Maybe I should just go, she said quietly. Take whatever they offer. Start over somewhere else. No. Rhett moved beside her, close but not touching. You run now. You'll be running forever, and I'll be damned if I let them drive you off land you've bled for. Then what do we do? He was quiet for a long moment, jaw working. Then, we need Turner. Turner, he's the one who knows all Donovan's secrets, who might be convinced to talk if the right pressures applied. His eyes were hard as flint. Man like that, he's got to have evidence hidden somewhere, real evidence of Donovan's schemes. And if he doesn't or won't talk, then we make our own justice. He turned to her, and she saw something wild in his eyes, reckless. I've been playing by their rules, trying to be civilized. But this isn't civilized. This is war. That night, they made their plans. Not in her house or his Too Dangerous Now. Instead, they met at the old lime kiln halfway between their properties, abandoned and forgotten by everyone except lovers and outlaws. Turner's been holed up at the Broken Wheel Saloon, Rhett reported. Drinking heavy, celebrating his freedom. Tomorrow night there's a big card game. He'll be there, along with most of Donovan's crew. And Donovan. Town council meeting. Convenient, isn't it? His smile was sharp. Almost like they want Turner unprotected. Evelyn understood. Turner knew too much, had seen too much. Donovan might have gotten him freed, but that didn't mean he trusted him. So we grab him after the game, she said, when he's drunk and alone. You think I'm sitting this out? They burned my barn. Rhett, they're trying to steal my home. Her hand moved to the pistol at her hip. I'm done being the victim in their story. He studied her in the moonlight, this woman who'd transformed from abandoned wife to fierce survivor. All right, but we do this smart. No killing unless we have to. We need him talking, not bleeding. 2 nights later, they struck. Turner stumbled out of the saloon near midnight, weaving between buildings as he headed for his boarding house. He never saw them coming. Rhett's rope caught him neat around the middle, yanking him into the alley. Before Turner could shout, Evelyn had her gun at his temple. Hello, Jake, she said pleasantly. Remember me? They took him to an abandoned miner's shack in the hills, far from any help, tied to a chair. Turner's bravado crumbled quick as old adobe in rain. You're making a mistake, he blustered. Donovan set fire to my barn. Evelyn interrupted. And you're going to help me prove it? I don't know anything about... Rhett's fist connected with Turner's jaw, snapping his head back. Try again. It took 3 hours. 3 hours of threats and persuasion, of Rhett's fists and Evelyn's cold fury, but eventually, Turner broke. Safe, he gasped through bloody lips. In Donovan's office, behind the portrait, documents, payments from Eastern buyers, plans to drive out half the county, sell to developers. And the judge. Bought and paid for. Got receipts in there, too. Evelyn exchanged a look with Rhett. Breaking into the marshal's office was madness, but they were already beyond the point of safe choices. If you're lying, Rhett began. I ain't, I swear, just let me go. I'll leave town. You'll never see me again. They left him tied in the shack with water in reach. Someone would find him in a day or two. As they rode back toward town, Evelyn felt the weight of what they were about to do. "Once we do this, there's no going back," Rhett said, echoing her thoughts. "There's already no going back." She checked her gun, resolve hardening. "They wanted to break me, scatter me to the wind like ash. Instead, they've shown me what I'm capable of." He reached over, briefly squeezing her hand. "Whatever happens, we face it together," she finished. The marshal's office was dark. Donovan still at his meeting. They slipped in through the back window Rhett had scouted earlier. Inside, Evelyn kept watch while Rhett worked on the safe behind the portrait. "Hurry," she whispered, every nerve screaming danger. "Almost there." The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, neat as a crooked man could make them, were the documents Turner had promised: receipts, contracts, correspondence detailing the whole scheme. "God almighty," Rhett breathed. "He's been at this for years. There's enough here to hang him twice over." "Then let's go before—" The door burst open. Donovan stood there, gun drawn, face twisted with rage. Well, the lovers turned thieves. He stepped inside, keeping the gun trained on them. "Drop your weapons." They had no choice. Their guns clattered to the floor. "Thought you were clever, did you?" Turner squealed like a pig soon as we found him. Donovan's smile was cold. "Now I've got you for breaking and entering on top of everything else. Judge'll have you both swinging by week's end." "And these documents?" Evelyn asked. "What documents? All I see is two criminals who broke into my office." He stepped closer. "Should have taken my offer. Mrs. Harper, now you'll lose everything." That's when Evelyn saw the letter opener on the desk. Within reach if she moved fast. She caught Rhett's eye, saw understanding flash there. "You're right," she said, letting defeat color her voice. "We should have—" She lunged for the letter opener as Rhett dove for Donovan's gun arm. The office erupted in violence. Donovan's gun went off, the bullet splintering wood inches from Evelyn's head. She drove the letter opener into his gun hand, making him howl and drop the weapon. Rhett and Donovan crashed into the desk, grappling for control. Papers flew everywhere, including the incriminating documents. Evelyn scrambled to gather them as the men fought. A second gunshot. Both men froze. Sheriff Coleman stood in the doorway, smoking gun pointed at the ceiling. Behind him, half the town seemed to have gathered, drawn by the commotion. "Everyone stop moving," Coleman ordered. "Now, someone want to explain why my colleague is bleeding and these folks are in his office?" "They broke in," Donovan snarled, cradling his wounded hand. "Thieves, criminals." "To retrieve evidence of his crimes," Evelyn said, holding up the documents. "Sheriff, these papers prove Marshal Donovan has been stealing land, burning property, using his position to enrich himself." Coleman's eyes narrowed. "Those could be forged." "Then why was he so eager to kill us over them?" Rhett asked, getting slowly to his feet. The crowd pressed closer, murmuring. Adelaide Hutchins pushed to the front, eyes bright with curiosity. "What's it say?" someone called out. Evelyn made a decision. Raising her voice so all could hear, she began to read. Names, dates, amounts. The systematic robbery of half the county laid bare in Donovan's own hand. The crowd's murmur turned to angry rumbling. Some of those names were their neighbors, their friends, people who'd lost farms to mysterious fires. Rustlers, legal tricks. "Lies," Donovan shouted. But the damage was done. Sheriff Coleman took the documents, scanning them with growing anger. "Jim Donovan, you're under arrest. Judge Harrington, too, soon as I find him." "You can't I'm the law here. Not anymore." Coleman nodded to his deputies. "Take him." As they dragged Donovan away, still protesting, Evelyn felt her knees go weak. Rhett's arm came around her waist, holding her steady. "It's over," he said quietly. "No," she corrected, looking up at him. "It's just beginning." The crowd was dispersing, but not before several people stopped to apologize, to shake their hands, to murmur words of support. The tide had turned. But as they walked out into the night, Evelyn knew the biggest challenge still remained. She was still a married woman. The feelings between her and Rhett were still forbidden. "What now?" Rhett asked as they stood in the street. "Now we rebuild my barn," she said firmly. "We work the land. We prove that we're exactly what we claimed neighbors helping each other survive." And Thomas, she was quiet for a long moment. Maybe it's time to stop waiting for ghosts to return. Time to find out what really happened to him. Rhett took her hand, there in the middle of the street where anyone could see. "Whatever you need, however long it takes." The town just saw their marshal hauled off for corruption. "I think they'll be too busy with that scandal to worry about us for a while." She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his touch. They'd won this battle, but the war for her freedom, real freedom, was just beginning. As they rode back toward their ranches, the eastern sky beginning to lighten with dawn, Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope, real burning hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have both her land and her heart's desire. The rancher next door had taught her to burn again. Now it was time to let that fire forge something new from the ashes of the old. The courthouse in Silver Springs stood like a monument to justice, its white columns gleaming in the morning sun. Evelyn adjusted her best dress, the blue one she'd salvaged from the fire, and climbed the steps with Rhett beside her. 6 months had passed since Donovan's arrest. 6 months of rebuilding and waiting and careful distance maintained in public, while her heart ached for more. Today, that might finally change. Mrs. Harper. A clerk appeared in the doorway. "Judge Matthews will see you now." The courtroom was nearly empty, just the judge, a court recorder, and in the corner, Sheriff Coleman as witness. Evelyn had wanted it this way. No spectacle, no gossip fodder, just the truth, finally spoken aloud. "Mrs. Harper," Judge Matthews began, studying the papers before him. "You've petitioned for a declaration of abandonment against your husband, Thomas McGraw Harper. This is a serious matter." "Yes, Your Honor." "Tell me, in your own words, what happened." Evelyn took a breath. 8 months ago, my husband rose before dawn, packed his belongings, and rode west. He left no note, no word of explanation. He hasn't returned or sent any communication since." "And you've made efforts to locate him?" "I've sent inquiries to every town within 100 miles, posted notices. Sheriff Coleman helped coordinate with other law enforcement." She gestured to the sheriff, who nodded confirmation. "We even hired a Pinkerton detective for 2 months." "And what did you discover?" This was the hard part. Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. Thomas was seen in Carson City, working at a mine, when the detective approached him. He claimed he had no wife, said he'd never been married. A murmur from the court recorder. Even the judge looked taken aback. "He denied your existence." "Yes, Your Honor. The detective, Mr. Phelps, has provided a sworn affidavit. Thomas is living under the name Tom Grant now. He's engaged to a merchant's daughter there." She'd cried when the detective's report arrived. Not from heartbreak that had passed months ago, but from the sheer cruelty of it. To not just leave, but to erase her entirely, as if their 5 years together had been nothing but dust. Judge Matthews reviewed the affidavit, his expression grave. "This is quite damning. Mrs. Harper, clear abandonment, coupled with bigamous intent." He looked up. "You understand that granting this petition doesn't dissolve your marriage, only establishes abandonment for property and legal purposes." "I understand," though her heart sank a little. She'd hoped. "However," the judge continued, "given the extreme nature of the abandonment and Mr. Harper's apparent intention to remarry illegally, I'm prepared to recommend your case for expedited divorce proceedings. It's rare, but the circumstances warrant it." Evelyn's breath caught. "Your Honor." A man who denies his wife's existence has severed the marriage bond as surely as if he'd died. I'll have my recommendation sent to the territorial court today. With luck and continued evidence of Mr. Harper's new life, you could be free within the year. Free? The word rang through her like a bell. The rest of the hearing passed in a blur. Papers signed, oaths sworn, the formal declaration of abandonment granted. As they emerged into the afternoon sun, Evelyn felt lighter than she had in months. "It's really happening," she said wonderingly. Rhett, who'd maintained careful distance throughout the hearing, finally allowed himself to smile. "You did it." "We did it." She wanted to take his hand but settled for walking close beside him. "The detective, the lawyer, the travel costs I couldn't have managed without your help. Partners, remember—" They were interrupted by Adelaide Hutchins, emerging from the general store across the street, but instead of her usual disapproving glare, the woman's expression was almost sympathetic. "Mrs. Harper," she called, hurrying over. "I heard about the hearing, about what Thomas did." Evelyn braced for judgment. "Mrs. Hutchins." "Disgraceful," Adelaide interrupted. "Denying his own wife and taking up with another woman." She shook her head vigorously. "I may have had my opinions about certain things, but no woman deserves what he did to you." It was as close to an apology as Evelyn was likely to get. She accepted it gracefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Hutchins." "You rebuild that ranch of yours proper," Adelaide continued. "Show everyone what a woman can do when she's not weighed down by a worthless man." She glanced at Rhett. "And if you need help, neighborly help, well, decent folks support each other." After she bustled away, Evelyn and Rhett exchanged amazed looks. "Did Adelaide Hutchins just give us her blessing?" Rhett asked. "I think she did." Evelyn laughed, feeling giddy. "What's next? Pigs flying." They rode home together, maintaining proper distance but talking freely. The landscape looked different somehow, the desert blooming with late spring flowers, the sky impossibly blue, the whole world suddenly full of possibility. Back at her ranch, they found an unexpected gathering. Neighbors had arrived with lumber and tools, organized by the new minister's wife who'd taken Adelaide's words about decent folks supporting each other to heart. "Heard you needed a new barn," Jacob Morrison called out. "Figure we can get the frame up before sunset if we work together." Evelyn's throat tightened with emotion. The same community that had whispered and judged was now here to help. Donovan's corruption had reminded them what really mattered: honest folks standing together against those who'd tear them down. The barn raising became a celebration. Women brought food, men contributed labor, children ran between the workers playing games. As the sun began to set, the new barn's frame stood proud against the sky, better and stronger than what had burned. "Speech," someone called out. "Let's hear from the lady of the house." Evelyn found herself pushed to the front, everyone gathering around. She looked at the faces, some familiar, some new, all waiting to hear what the abandoned woman had to say. "I came here 5 years ago as a bride," she began. "Young, hopeful, believing that hard work and determination would be enough. I learned different. Learned that this land doesn't care about your hopes. It tests you, breaks you down, sees what you're really made of." Murmurs of agreement from the crowd. "When my husband left, I thought my life was over. Thought I'd have to give up, go back east, admit defeat. But this land, and these people—" Her eyes found Rhett in the crowd. "They taught me I was stronger than I knew. Taught me that sometimes what breaks you also remakes you into something better." She raised her voice, letting it carry. "They tried to burn me out, drive me off, shame me into surrender. Instead, I'm still here. My cattle graze good grass, my crops grow in good soil, and now I've got the finest barn in the county thanks to all of you." Cheers rose from the gathering. "I'm not a widow," she continued, thinking of the court hearing. "Not anymore. I'm not abandoned or broken or any of the things they tried to name me. I'm a woman who stayed when he rode away. A woman who fought for what was hers. And with neighbors like you, I'm never fighting alone." The celebration lasted well into the night. Gradually, families drifted away, until only Evelyn and Rhett remained. Sitting on her new porch as stars emerged overhead. "Fine speech," he said quietly. "Meant every word." She finally let herself lean against his shoulder. "Especially the part about what this land taught me." His arm came around her, warm and solid. "And what's that?" "That sometimes the best things grow in the harshest ground. That what seems like an ending can be a beginning." She tilted her face up to his. "That the rancher next door can teach you to burn again." He kissed her then, there on her porch where anyone could see, but there was no one to see, no one to judge. Just two people who'd found each other across scorched earth and suspicion, who'd fought for the right to this moment. When they broke apart, Evelyn was breathless. "Stay," she whispered. "Not in the barn this time. Stay with me." "Evelyn, I know we're not married. No, the papers aren't final. But Rhett, I'm tired of waiting for permission to live my life. Tired of measuring every action against what others might think." He studied her face in the starlight. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Then let's go inside. Let the night keep our secrets a little longer." Inside, with the lamps turned low, they came together with all the fierce joy of those who'd earned their happiness. Every touch was a promise, every whisper a declaration of freedom from the past. The rancher next door had indeed taught her to burn again, and that fire consumed them both. Later, lying entwined as dawn painted the sky pink, Evelyn traced patterns on Rhett's chest. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he pressed a kiss to her hair. "Now we plant crops for next season, expand the herd, build a future worth having. Together. Always together. Whether it takes 6 months or 6 years for those divorce papers, I'm not going anywhere." His arms tightened around her. "I already lost one love to this land. I won't lose another." "You won't lose me," she promised. "This land made me too stubborn for that." They rose with the sun, working side by side as they had for months. But now there was no pretense, no careful distance. When his hand brushed hers over the water pump, she didn't pull away. When she brought him coffee mid-morning, she kissed his cheek without checking for watching eyes. The work was the same: mending fences, tending stock, fighting the eternal battle against drought and dust. But everything felt different when shared openly, honestly, without shame. That evening, as they sat watching the sun set over land she'd nearly lost, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Thomas riding away had seemed like the end of everything. Instead, it had been the beginning of discovering who she really was. "No regrets?" Rhett asked, reading her thoughtful mood. "No regrets," she confirmed. "How can I regret the path that led me to you to this?" She gestured at her thriving ranch, her new barn, the life she'd built from ashes. A horse appeared on the horizon, riding hard toward them. They tensed, old habits dying hard, but relaxed when they recognized Sheriff Coleman. "Evening, folks," he said, dismounting with a grin. "Thought you'd want to know right away. Just got word from Carson City. Seems Mr. Tom Grant got himself arrested for fraud. Turns out the merchant's daughter's father didn't take kindly to learning his future son-in-law already had a wife." Evelyn's hand found Rhett's. "Is he—" "In jail awaiting trial. And here's the interesting part. He's claiming he's not Thomas Harper. Never was. Says it's all mistaken identity." Coleman's grin widened. "Course, that means either he's lying now or he was lying when he married you. Either way, judge says it's grounds for immediate divorce on basis of fraud." The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Free. She would be truly, legally free. "How long?" Rhett asked, his voice carefully controlled. Papers should be here within the month, maybe sooner if the circuit judge hurries. After Coleman left, Evelyn and Rhett stood frozen, afraid to break the spell. "A month," she breathed. "Or sooner." His hands framed her face. "Evelyn Harper, when those papers come through, will you—" "Yes," she interrupted. "Whatever you're asking, yes." He laughed, joy breaking across his features like sunrise. "Let me ask properly, woman. Will you marry me, be my wife in truth, not just in heart?" "Yes," she said again, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, Rhett Callahan. I'll marry you in the same church where they whispered about us. I'll wear white and hold my head high and dare anyone to say I haven't earned my happiness." He spun her around there in the dusty yard, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, she was breathless and glowing. "The rancher next door taught me to burn again," she said, echoing the words that had become their private refrain. "But more than that, he taught me that from ashes, the most beautiful things can grow." "Together," he promised. "Always together." As stars emerged in the vast desert sky, Evelyn looked out over her land scarred by drought and fire, but still standing. Still hers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be more battles to fight, more storms to weather. But she would face them all with her head high and her heart full. No longer the abandoned wife, but a woman who'd chosen her own path. The desert had tested her and found her worthy. The rancher next door had shown her that love could bloom even in the harshest ground. And somewhere out there, Thomas Harper or Tom Grant, or whoever he chose to be, would have to live with the knowledge that he'd thrown away gold while chasing fool's pyrite. But that was his loss, his emptiness to carry. Evelyn had filled her life with something real love, land, and the promise of tomorrow dawning bright over Dust Creek. The beginning was ending. The real story, the one she'd write herself, was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Evelyn and Rhett's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening from? Please comment below and let me know your thoughts about their story. Did you see that ending coming? If you enjoyed this tale of love blooming in the harsh desert, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories of courage, romance, and redemption in the American frontier. Hit that like button if Evelyn's strength inspired you, and please click the hype button to help more people discover this story. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunrise. This is Wild West Night, signing off.